What's going on, everyone? Today I'm going to show you my approach to setting up a basic drum mix. In this case, a basic drum mix for a live session with live drums. I'm going to show you guys how I set up my busing, some plugins I like to use, and some tips and tricks that help me kind of get the raw drum tracks to a place where you can then work with them kind of with the rest of the mix. So let's head over to Pro Tools and check it out.
Alright, so here we are in Pro Tools with our drum stems. Pretty simple setup, overheads, 2 kick mics, 2 snare mics, and then a hi-hat mic and a tom mic. Generally, first thing I do is set up my drum bus, have all the drum tracks going to the drum bus, and then I'll set up some extra buses, a parallel compression bus, a crush bus where I can really, distort the drums with like a distressor just to give it some extra, presence, and then usually a drum room. And what I like to do is have the drum parallel and drum crush buses fed usually by just the kick and the snare drum and like the toms. I don't usually like putting the cymbals or the hi-hats into those 2 buses because I feel like it can, crush the cymbals too much and sometimes it just sounds messy. I do sometimes send cymbals to the parallel compression bus, but on the send I usually turn it down quite a bit. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do, after I check and make sure that all of my tracks are loaded in properly, is gating the drums. So here I'm going to go through and put on a basic gate. I really like Pro Tools, the Dyne 3 noise gate. That look ahead function is really useful. Usually I'll just put it on the kick gate setting, drop down the attack, drop down the release, and start just dialing in the threshold to where really only the transient is popping through. Now from there, once I kind of have that threshold figured out, I'll go through and start moving up the attack and the release. It's really important with kick drums to push the release up long enough that the entire drum, the entire length of the hit is coming through and you're not cutting anything off. Now I'll go ahead and play with the attack a little bit. As you can see, when you really crank the attack, you lose the transient completely. But I'm going to pull it down pretty much to where it still sounds natural, but the attack is still pretty quick. Now obviously you can go through and sidechain this noise gate. For this example, I'm just going to kind of do a quick and dirty drum mix. So this is just an easy way to set your gates up so you can start working with the mix and get rid of some unnecessary noise. Doing the same thing for the kick out. Moving the threshold a little bit because the signal on this track isn't as hot as that other one. Now, I'm not going to gate the snare drums on this specific track because you can hear how busy the snare is. He's doing a lot of ghost notes in there, and because this isn't just some, rock and metal song, I don't think that snare top needs a gate. However, I am going to gate the snare bottom, just so, maybe when he hits a little harder, the snare bottom can kind of accent his harder hits. Also, just get rid of some extra noise in there. Alright, now I'm going to go up to my overhead track. Real quick though, I generally don't gate toms. As you can see here, usually it's easier for me to just kind of manually go through and trim out all the silence. It's a little time consuming, but because toms, they can sustain so much, I find that they sound a little unnatural when you just gate the crap out of them. So I usually just like to go in, trim them down a little bit, and put a fade in there. Because also you're gonna have those tom mics pretty loud. I like toms to have a lot of presence, and you can really hear a bad noise gate on the tom track when it's loud. Alright, so now what I'm going to go ahead and do is start panning my drums. I really like to listen to the overhead track and then try and pan the toms like I did there so they match kind of the stereo image in the overheads. Now I'm doing the same thing with the hi-hat. Moving that hi-hat over to the left so it's kind of sitting in the same spot as it is in the drum overhead. Sometimes if you don't do this correctly, you kind of lose the stereo dimension of the drums. You know, you put the tom on the left in the mix, and when it's in the right on the overhead, and it just kind of sounds muddy, and in the middle, you lose the space. All right. Now, because this was a live track, you can hear the band in the background of the drum overhead. So it's going to be really important to go in with our filter and, take out a lot of that low-end frequency content. And for this application, I really like the Neutron EQ. This is a really good surgical EQ for, getting rid of all the frequencies below a certain threshold. As you can see, it really just clears it out. Now, I don't want to get too aggressive with this particular EQ because some of the snare body is in the overhead. So if you trim it down too much, you're going to lose some of the snare drum. But I also want to get rid of, I guess, pretty much everything, below around 200 hertz. And, maybe we'll saturate it a little bit. But saturation is going to raise that noise floor, so I'm going to be a little judicious with it. Can't get too carried away with saturation if I want to keep that noise floor low. Alright, gonna go ahead and work with the hi-hat mic here, doing the same thing. But for this hi-hat, I'm really gonna trim out a lot of the low end. I feel like hi-hats can sound a little messy if they have too much 1K. So I feel like it's good to just kind of lose everything below almost 1K. Again, using a little saturation. I love saturation on hi-hats. I think it helps them pop. And the sizzle that's already in the hi-hat can be brought out with some saturation. But again, not getting too carried away with it to keep the noise floor relatively low. Alright, so now I'm going to start doing some basic drum leveling and also dialing in a little bit of compression on my kick and snare. Generally, I keep my faders kind of low on the faders low on the tracks, so I have some headroom in the bus. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of Neutron to the drum bus. I'm just going to start out using a preset and then tweak it from there. Big fan of just the basic drum bus. And I felt like it was getting a little, too intense with the EQ. I didn't necessarily want to chop out that much low mid. But overall, I think that's a good EQ setting for, cleaning stuff up and getting those drums to sound really clean. Just gonna put a little compression on the drum bus. No need to just go crazy with stuff right now. And then for good measure, I'm gonna put a little tape on the drum bus. Alright, I'm gonna start messing with some kick EQ using Chef 73. Just gonna put a little extra low in there to beef the kick up. And then maybe some mid-range just to kind of get the attack of the kick drum to come through. Alright. I'm going to start setting up some compression now on my kick drum. And for this, I generally like using, some of these transparent compressors, like medium mish ratio and a nice long attack time. Using a really short attack time on kick drum was a mixing mistake that I made for a long time. And I was like, why are my drums sounding tiny? And that was why. Obviously, this is going to vary a lot depending on, how aggressive you want your drums and, how hard the drummer's playing. But generally, I like a longer attack time for anything kick drum. Alright, going on to the kick out track. So the kick out seems to have a lot of kind of fuddy, low mid content. I definitely think that it can be mixed in with that other kick track to kind of round out this kick sound. And then I'm going to saturate a little because, why not? Great free saturation, preamp plugin too. Love the Club Grand stuff. Thinning out the hi-hat a little bit. For snare drums, I love the SSL E-Series channel. This is a real classic for the snare. Just the way the compressor is set up on this channel strip, it just works for snare drums. Also, the EQ is great for, adding like a little more brightness to your snare, or going in with the low mid band and, giving the snare a little more push. As you can see, also the filter is engaged, and I'm cutting out all the bass frequencies. With the filters, I generally find you don't want to go much above 200 hertz, or maybe even lower. Sometimes you don't even want to go above 150 because you want to keep that push in the snare drum. If you cut it out completely, you lose a lot of the tone of the snare drum, and it starts to sound real small. Gonna saturate the snare a little bit. Again, being mindful of the noise floor. So for the snare bottom, I'm just going to hit it with the 1176. Another good snare drum compressor. It sounds good. It's great for also thinning out a snare drum. Sometimes it's not always the one you want to reach for because it does kind of remove low-end content, but for snare bottom, it's a good choice. Alright, now I'm going to go work with the toms. Reaching again for the SSL, another good choice for toms. Similar to the snare drum, just the compressor sounds really good with the attack of the toms. It really brightens them up and gives them a good presence. Adding a little bit of low end to the low tom. For rack toms too, this is a setting I've been using for years. Just a standard Pro Tools channel strip with the hard rack tom setting. Gonna remove a little bit of low end. Definitely don't sleep on the Pro Tools channel strip when it comes to, setting up some good drum tones, some good tom sounds. Adding a little extra attack to the tom. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and do some parallel compression on everything besides the hi-hat and the cymbals. Got to make sure my panning is set up correctly on the bus. Otherwise it's going to mess up the stereo space. It's basically going to match the panning that's on the fader. This particular plugin is a great transparent compressor. And in this case, I'm using it not on the parallel compression bus, but on the main compression bus. This is also a freeware plugin, so I definitely recommend picking this one up. Alright, now I'm going to do some parallel compression. I'm a big fan of this particular plugin. A really aggressive parallel compressor. Not always what you want to reach for, because it is pretty aggressive, but I really like using this on the parallel compression bus. Getting it dialed up pretty hot, a lot of saturation, a lot of compression, and then turning the bus down till it's blended with the regular drum bus. Trying to do that thing that Andrew Sheps talks about, having your parallel compression bus basically have there be no volume difference between the parallel compression bus and the regular drum bus, because otherwise you can kind of fool yourself into thinking that, oh, it's better because, you perceive it as a little louder. So I'm going to try and just get that fader sitting to where there's basically no volume difference between when that parallel bus is engaged and disengaged. I also like the 1176 on overheads because of that kind of thinning effect it has. It's good for kind of focusing on higher frequencies. Alright, so let's play around with some the drum crush. In this case I'm using a distressor style plugin on a distortion setting. And this is going to really crush things down. And then I'll do the same thing again. Turn the bus down and try and mix it so there's no volume difference between just the regular drum bus and the drum bus plus the crush and the parallel bus. Adding a little more beef to the kick. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of reverb to our drums to give them some space. Using Valhalla Vintage Verb, which is a really sick reverb plugin for this application. putting on the low cut to get rid of any nasty like low frequencies, kind of below 500 hertz. And then in this case, I'm just gonna send some snare drum and maybe some toms to that reverb. I'm gonna use a really low attack time, generally, below 0.5 seconds. I'm also gonna do the same thing with those rack toms. Gonna feed those to the reverb as well. So I feel like it's, having a little bit of space on those toms sounds good. All right. So at this point, this is kind of a good, starting place for when I would mix something like this, like a live session. The drums are sounding nice and compressed, and then I can always, add more compression, add less, and tweak more as I mix in the rest of the tracks. So let's see how these drum tracks sound with some of the other instruments. That's a cool song, too. Alright, sounding good. Toms are, peeking through. Sounding pretty sick. But yeah, when I sit down to work on a song, this is generally how I'll kind of start out the drum mix. I'll get my bussing set up. I'll do some basic cleanup with gating and EQ. I'll get, a little bit of compression going, set up some parallel stuff, and then from there, I'll bring in the other tracks and then adjust as needed. Sometimes I'll go a little too overboard in this step. I might have to dial back compression. Other times I'll need to push the drum bus up a lot more, add more parallel compression. But yeah, that's just kind of a basic rundown of some of the plugins I like to use on drums and how I get stuff going for a drum mix. If you liked the video, you can check out my channel. I got more music related content. Also, if you have any tips or suggestions, stuff I should try, stuff that I should maybe do a little different, be sure to drop them in the comments, man. I'm all ears. Well, that's going to do it for this one. Stay tuned for more audio and music related content. Peace.